Welcome back to another deep dive. Today, we're kicking off a very special series. It's dedicated to those of you on a pretty crucial journey, preparing for the CSWIP 3.1 Welding Inspector Exam. Think of this as, well, your focused study session. We're not just going to give you the right answers to some key multi-choice questions. Oh, no. We'll really unpack why those answers are correct and, what they actually mean in the real world of welding inspection. Our mission is building solid understanding. For the exam, yes, but also for your career.
Exactly. The exam, it's a big milestone for any aspiring inspector, definitely. But the real goal, it's mastering the principles underneath. What we'll explore today, it goes beyond just memorizing facts. It really delves into that foundational knowledge that makes you, well, effective, reliable. And every detail, it connects back to the bigger picture, weld quality, structural integrity. It all ties together.
Okay, then let's jump right into our first challenge. First question up asks, the majority of welder qualification tests are carried out using unbacked joints because options are A, it is quicker and cheaper if back gouging is not required. B, if the welding process is not TIG, back purging is not required. C, all welder qualification tests are done on a small diameter pipe. And D, it requires more skill and increases the welder's qualification range. And the answer here is D. It requires more skill and increases the welder's qualification range. So can you expand on that for us? Why is welding without backing considered such a definitive test, especially when a lot of real-world jobs do use backing?
That's a great question, and it really gets to the heart of the philosophy behind qualifying welders. See, when a welder works on an unbacked joint, they are completely responsible for forming that critical root bead. No support. And it's arguably the most challenging part of making a full penetration weld. It demands incredible precision. You need control over penetration, heat input, fusion, getting it just right. Without backing, any little slip up, maybe not enough penetration or too much melt through, root concavity, it's immediately obvious. So, passing this tougher test, it shows a consistently higher level of skill, manual dexterity, process control, the whole package. It's about proving mastery, really, at the most demanding level. And if a welder can produce a sound unbacked weld, well, then they're considered qualified for the easier stuff, too, like joints with backing. So it significantly broadens their qualification range. It covers more ground.
Right, so the key takeaway is, it's not just difficult for the sake of being difficult, it's a rigorous benchmark. It proves the welder can handle the absolute trickiest part of the weld. That gives confidence in their skills for a wider range of projects, backed or not. Kind of like testing an athlete on the toughest course to certify them for general fitness.
Exactly that kind of principle, yeah.
Okay, that really clarifies how skill ranges are established. So once you've got a qualified welder, their actual work often really hinges on proper joint preparation. Which brings us nicely to our next point about weld geometry. Question 2. A typical included angle for MMA welding a full penetration pipe butt joint is Bayes, 35B 72, 90 to year, dependent on the pipe diameter. And the answer we're looking for here is B, 70 to year. Now, specifically for MMA welding manual metal arc, what makes this 70-degree angle so important for a good full penetration pipe butt joint?
Well, what's fascinating here is how practicality and the physics of the process dictate the design. For MMA, that 70-degree included angle for a full penetration pipe butt, that's pretty much the industry standard, widely accepted. Why? Because it gives enough access for the electrode. MMA electrodes, they can be quite chunky, right? You need room to maneuver. And that access is absolutely crucial for the welder to make sure they get proper fusion. All the way through the joint, root to cap, just imagine trying to weld down in a really narrow V-groove. The electrode would struggle to reach the root properly. You'd risk lack of fusion on the sides, maybe incomplete penetration, or trapping slag because the molten slag just can't get out easily. That's a big one. On the other hand, if the angle was way too wide, say 90 degrees or more, well, you'd need a lot more filler metal. That means more welding time, higher material costs, and it significantly increases the risk of distortion because of all that extra heat input. So 70 degrees, it's kind of the sweet spot. It offers that optimal balance for quality and efficiency.
Okay. So that 70 degrees isn't just some random number pulled out of a hat. It's the engineered sweet spot. It balances electrode access, how much material you use, and controlling distortion, specifically for MMA.
Right.
It's a great example of how standards develop from real-world practical challenges.
Precise.
Right. This next question, this is where it gets really interesting, I think, especially thinking about long-term performance. Safety. Question 3 asks, a fabrication procedure calls for the toes of all welds to be blended in by grinding. The reason for this is to A, make the weld suitable for liquid, dye, penetrant inspection. B, improve fatigue life. C, reduce residual stresses, day. and the standard points it to be improved fatigue life. Now, for a lot of people, grinding might just seem cosmetic, right? Make it look neat. What's the fundamental engineering reason? Why is blending those weld toes so critical for long-term integrity, for avoiding failure?
You're absolutely right. It's far, far more than just cosmetic. I mean, sure, grinding can improve the look, and sometimes it might help with certain inspection methods. But the most critical reason for blending weld toes is to significantly improve fatigue life. Think about the toes of a weld. They are, by nature, geometric discontinuities. You've got this sharp, abrupt change in shape where the weld metal meets the parent material. These sharp transitions create what we call stress concentration points, stress risers. Think of it like a tiny notch cut into something. Where's it going to break first? Right at the notch. So when a component is under cyclic loading, repeated stress, vibration, like in bridges, aircraft, machinery, those stress concentration points are prime spots for tiny cracks to start. And once a crack starts under continued cycles, it grows and grows until eventually fatigue failure. By carefully grinding and blending those transitions smoothly, making them more gradual, you effectively increase the radius at those points. You smooth out the stress riser. This lets the applied stress distribute more evenly over a bigger area. And that really dramatically extends the service life of the component. It's crucial for safety and reliability wherever fatigue is a factor.
Wow. Okay, so the key insight there is blending weld toes isn't just tidying up. It's a critical engineering step. It actively stops cracks from starting by smoothing out those high stress points. It's a direct investment in the long-term safety, the reliability of the whole structure.
Couldn't have put it better myself. It's fundamental.
Okay, let's switch focus a bit to fillet welds now. These are incredibly common in fabrication, often carrying significant loads. Our next question. The strength of a fillet weld is determined by A, leg length, B, weld profile, C, weld width, D, throat thickness. Expert, why is throat thickness the definitive factor here? When we talk about a fillet weld's ability to hold up under stress, leg length seems so, obvious visually.
That's a common point of confusion, actually. It raises an important question. How do we accurately measure and assess weld strength, especially for fillets? Now, leg length, weld width, the overall profile, these are important, yes. They describe the geometry, the shape, the size of the weld, but it's the throat thickness that's the definitive factor when it comes to strength. The throat thickness, technically, is the shortest distance from the root of the fillet weld right out to its face, perpendicular to the face. Essentially, it represents the effective load-bearing cross-section. That's the actual bit of weld material resisting the forces applied to the joint. Imagine trying to pull apart two plates joined by a fillet weld. Where's it most likely to fail? Across that smallest cross-section, which is the throat. So for an inspector, understanding this difference is vital. You need it for accurate assessment, making sure the weld can handle the designed loads. A bigger leg length or a certain profile might help you achieve the required throat thickness, sure, but the throat itself is the direct measure of strength. Understood.
So key takeaway. For fillet weld, strength isn't just about how big it looks. It's about how much effective material is actually doing the work, bearing the load. An inspector needs to see past the surface geometry to assess that crucial throat thickness, the true measure of capacity.
That's it, exactly.
All right, for our final question in this deep dive into exam essentials, we're looking at testing methods, vital for quality assurance, obviously. In a bend test, when the face of the specimen is in tension and the root is in compression, the test is called AA, root bend, B, side bend, C, face bend, D, longitudinal bend. And the correct answer is C, face bend. Can you maybe walk us through the mechanics? Why is it called a face bend, and what does it actually tell us about the weld's integrity?
Sure. If we, connect this back to the bigger picture of QA, the naming for bend test is usually quite direct. It describes what's happening. So in a face bend test, the actual face of the weld, the side that was exposed, the top surface as it was welded, is positioned on the outside curve of the bend. This placement means the weld face gets put under tensile stress. It's being stretched, pulled apart. At the same time, the root of the weld, the other side where the first pass went down, is on the inner curve of the bend. So the root is experiencing compressive stress. It's being pushed together. Now, this test setup is specifically designed to check the ductility, how much it can stretch without breaking, and the soundness of the weld metal, and also the heat-affected zone right there on the weld face under maximum tension. It's really good at revealing any surface or near-surface flaws. Things like porosity, lack of fusion, maybe some small inclusions, things you might miss visually. If the sample passes a face bend test, it shows the weld metal and its immediate surroundings can deform significantly without fracturing. And that's a critical indicator of its integrity, its ability to perform under stress in service.
Right, so the key insight is that a face bend test is a direct, powerful way to check the ductility and soundness of the weld's outer surface when it's being pulled apart. It reveals hidden defects and confirms the weld can bend without catastrophic failure. A really fundamental check for quality assurance.
Absolutely fundamental.
Wow, that was a truly insightful deep dive. Some really foundational concepts there for anyone getting ready for the CSWIP 3.1 Welding Inspector Exam. From, welder qualifications right through to the structure and testing of the welds themselves. Understanding why these answers are correct gives you a much stronger handle on the material.
Indeed. And that's the goal, isn't it? Knowledge is most valuable when you understand it, when you can apply it. These details, they're not just abstract exam questions. They represent real-world principles for safe, effective welding. They directly impact the quality, the longevity of everything that's fabricated. Applying that critical thinking to these basics really sets you up for success, not just in the exam room, but throughout your whole career as an inspector.
Absolutely. So as you continue your studies, keep asking why. Keep digging deeper as you go through the material. And maybe, as you reflect on these specific points we've discussed today, consider this provocative thought. How do these precise requirements and testing methods, everything from demanding that high level of welder skill with unbacked joints to meticulously blending weld toes, how does all that ultimately contribute to the overall safety and longevity of massive complex structures? Things like bridges, power plants, aircraft components. Far beyond just that single weld. Think about that ripple effect of quality. Its profound impact on, everything around us. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.